Welcome to this edition of Beyond the Details. Today we're going to focus on what many people claim to be the most beautiful Ferrari ever made, the Ferrari 275 GTB. And in this case, it's a one of 5 built with a long nose and this type of configuration. One of the things I wanted to point out is that we're actually going to do a complete concours preparation. So this is the way I would get a car typically before we take it to a show. I'm going to walk you through the process from the very beginning of actually inspecting the car, looking at it. We're going to talk about things what we use for reference material, and we'll actually have a scoring sheet available too to use as our backup. We'll walk around the car using that scoring sheet to see what we need to change. I've brought hardware with me and some other little changes we need to make that I was already prepared for. We'll also go through the engine compartment and detail that, as well as do the interior with the wood dash and some of the other finer points of this car. So let's get started on this Ferrari 275 GTB and go beyond the details. Okay, so we've opened the hood now, we're ready to get started. What I'd like to do is to clean everything first, and then we'll move into the actual detailing, looking at things like the belts and hoses. We're looking at some of the markings that are in here. There are decals and other little things that we'll pick up along the way. But to get started, we're going to remove the air cleaner assembly so we have more access to the carburetors and we can clean around those. We're also going to remove this washer bag over here. So once that's done, we'll start cleaning and then we'll move on to the actual detailing part itself. Okay, so we have the air cleaner assembly removed at this point. Very tedious job, each one of those little washers. Of course, we're trying to protect getting anything into those intakes. So now we've got the air cleaner assembly removed. We'll just pull this washer bottle out of the way. Just a little side note, these washer bottles are very delicate. They're this weird plastic material, usually ugly like this, and they're so many heat cycles that they become brittle. Problem is that they're not available anymore and they're very expensive. So we treat these with as much respect as we would, say, that carburetor right there. Okay, we've got the air cleaner assembly removed at this point and also that washer bottle. You can see now we have a lot more access. So we'll come in now and start cleaning these carbs and work our way down to the bottom of the engine compartment. We need to get a few different things. There's some interesting brass on here that we can clean up. It'll really make it pop. When you see the car, even with the air cleaner on there, you'll be able to see that detail. So let's get started. We're going to move on through here. I need to get some cleaning stuff and get going. We're going to get started now cleaning this engine compartment. The idea here again is to get that incredible contrast that we're always after, so that everything looks darker, deeper, more in color instead of this sort of overall gray finish that it looks now. So one of the things I'm going to get started with, we're going to start from the carburetors and work our way down. I'm using a Dremel today. This is a cordless, but what's interesting is these are used in the dental industry. And what it is they're small latex, almost like fans, but they're impregnated with a little bit of an abrasive on them. So imagine that you're polishing something like porcelain dental work. That's what this is for. So it's very non-invasive. I can use it on this brass and it won't polish it. Instead, it will just clean it. And there are varying degrees of the abrasive. So you can get something that's a little more aggressive. This is a very, very mild one. So all this is going to do is basically just break the tarnish that's on top of the brass pieces. And then we're going to go in and use a brass cleaner, and that will make this really pop. So if you come in here, you can already see I've started working on these two versus these two here, and they're already starting to get cleaner. So let me start working here. I have a little touch-up to do, and then we'll work our way to the front of the carburetors here, and at the same time, then I'll come back and hit it with the conditioner. One of the things I've also done is these are refillable ink pens, or paint brushes actually. And what I've done is use this, our brass treatment, and actually filled this with the brass treatment. So all we have to do is just brush it on as if we were painting them. And it leaves a nice coating behind. This has to sit on here for just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to go around and just do all the various pieces and let it sit, and we'll come back and polish them again. But we're not looking for a high gloss polish. We're basically just looking for a natural clean finish, sort of like this. This is relatively clean instead of being a high gloss. You can see almost an immediate reaction as I clean over the brass. And again, we'll just let that sit for a minute or two. Okay, we're just about finished on the other side as far as the cleaning goes. We're now moving to this side. We started soaking the carburetors in a little bit of degreaser, and they'll be cleaned up in just a couple of minutes. Go back and touch up those brass pieces I showed you from the other side. We're going to do the same thing here, although it has different features. Of course, we're trying not to be invasive and not change any of the settings on these carbs. We're only cleaning the hardware and leaving it in place. And then we'll move around this way and we'll put a little dressing here and there. And of course, before it all goes back together, we'll do some semi-gloss black touch-up that needs to be done on the other side. Both the steering column and the side mount have some areas that have, it looks like, just general wear and tear. So we'll go in there and that'll sharpen that up nicely. And we'll be ready to wrap this up and put the air cleaner assembly back on, and we'll have a complete car. Okay, so we're just about finished now with cleaning the engine compartment. We're going to come back in a little bit once all this dries. I've got it all prepped. We're going to do some black touch-up in here. Also, I removed this masking tape that was on the alternator and got that fixed. And then we'll come back, we'll do the final on it, which means we'll put the air cleaner assembly back in, re-glue some of the decals that are peeling off. We'll also be exchanging some hardware, making it from the zinc hardware that's on here now, which is incorrect, and replace it with black oxide. That'll be somewhere around the throttle linkage, and then there's a couple pieces too around the distributors. And that'll make it exactly the way it should be. That's the way it should have come from the factory. I guess, during services and things like that, some of the hardware gets changed, so we're going to put it back to where it should be. Okay, we're ready to get started on the interior. We've got a lot of work to do in here. The car is driven quite a bit, so the headliner is kind of dirty. It's got handprints all over it. This is pretty dusty. All this is vinyl, so it's easy to clean, but it's just time consuming. We have quite a bit to do. So we're gonna get started on the dash first. We'll wipe everything down and get it all dusted off. And then we'll come back and start working around the gauges and all the switch gear here. And once we're done with that, we'll move on to doing the wood part of the dash. One of the places that's often forgotten is here. You've got this chrome molding that goes around, and a lot of dirt gets trapped in between there. So we don't give it a lot of pressure, but just enough to knock that dirt out from between the vinyl and the chrome. Just run it around gently and a lot of that dirt should come right out. moving on, I'm just using an all-purpose cleaner. Not a lot of material, just enough that the towel is damp and it's good for wiping. And as you know, we are getting tons of dirt off of it, as you can see here. Next thing I'll do is to clean the steering wheel. I'm not going to polish it. Still, I always look for a natural finish. Wheel, as far as I know, has always been not a high gloss finish, but a semi-gloss finish. So we're going to make this shiny and more appropriate for the way it looks. Basically, it's the same type of thing with tires. You know, I'm not a big fan of extreme tire shines and things like that, where it's just super high gloss and wet look. It's the same thing here. You don't want to make it look too fake. It should look exactly the way the car was designed. You know, this is a 1965 car, so it should kind of have that warm and fuzzy feeling. It wasn't a high polish. So I'm going to put a little bit of the Renaissance wax, which is basically it's a furniture restorer that I use. It will give a little bit of a polish, and at the same time, it leaves a nice satin finish and leaves a wax behind. So it's a nice one-step product to make it look really sharp. You can use an applicator or just simply put it on with your fingertip like I do. Either way works just as well. The object is to let it sit on here for a few minutes and sort of meld its way in. And it's really nice for all this checking in here, because the checking meaning the exact pattern that's here on the spokes themselves. It gets in there and it bites in and it keeps them nice and clean. And the best part is you can use it on the plastic center. You don't have to change products. So again, it's very light polish, but also with a preservative wax that's left behind. Next thing we're going to do is to use a furniture grade beeswax. It's probably the best wood preservatives I've ever used. Maybe there's something better, but I haven't found it yet. It's perfect for these dashboards and for the steering wheels because it leaves a nice finish behind. It has a little bit of a cleaning agent in it, but not much, but just enough to make it the right tone. So with this, we'll use one of our little applicators here. Smear it around. Start with the steering wheel. We'll get this wrapped up first. Okay, and we'll move on to the dash. What I like to do is always work in the grain of the wood in the same direction as the grain. This also won't harm the plastic switches, and it actually works really well on Bakelite if you're doing older cars. I'm going to go back in and use a couple of swabs. And it fits right in there. Okay, we'll start wiping the steering wheel off. Now that the wax has set, our trusty stick will get in between all the cracks. Now before I finish these cars, I usually go back and just touch everything up once, just to make sure that I didn't miss anything, or sometimes something will dry in a certain way that'll leave a smudge. So before I will actually complete the entire interior, I'll come out and just wipe the dash all over again, make sure I have all these gauges straightened out. Now we finished up the dash and we're just going to let that sit for a little bit. We'll move on to the seats. These seats have had some work, I think, through the years, maybe a light dye at some point, but we'll clean them as best as we can. We're going to at least make them look a little bit brighter. And then we'll move into the center console. We'll do the kick panel up in here. We may actually have to do a little touch up here as well. And then we can move on from there. So we're in good shape. Okay, well, we cleaned this up pretty well. We're just gonna let it sit and dry for a few minutes. And then we'll go back and use a leather conditioner on it. Maybe see if we can get that to adhere a little bit. We'll probably use a little bit of heat too to get it going. Once this dries, I may go over it again just to make sure I'm getting all the dirt out of the out from in between the seams. And then before we apply a conditioner. So let's let it dry though and see where we are. Okay, we're back on the engine compartment now. What we're going to do next is I've blocked off this area around the steering shaft. So some of the paint's been chipped away. So my goal is just to clean up the area. We're going to refinish it with some black paint. We'll also go around and do all the touch-up that needs to be done on the side panels, which are, actually it's behind the washer bottle, but I know they're there. Then we'll move our way around the rest of the engine compartment and we'll change out some hardware. From there, we'll start putting the air cleaner assembly back on, do a final prep on it. So a couple things of note, and I'm sure that people will mention this. The car does have that beautiful Optima battery in there and it's pretty bold, but before this car will go to an event, we will put a more period correct battery in it. Now, according to Ferrari judging, it's not necessary because battery is something that's a replaceable item, just like brake pads. I mean, certainly can't control any of that stuff. Just for aesthetics, we're going to put a correct tar top battery into the car before we put it on the show field. The other thing we'll probably change out, the car will go in for service soon. We're going to change out these oil filters and put a period correct looking Fram filter in there, which has the markings on it that would have been on it in 1965 when the car was born. So that's where we are. Let me get started on doing the steering column, and then we'll work our way out for the other touch-up, and then we'll start putting the engine back together. Okay, so while the paint's drying on the steering column, I'm going to go back in and just touch up the carburetors a little bit, get the hardware sharpened up. I put some solvent on there. It's a specific product that I use that makes the black oxide a little bit blacker and takes away any tool marks that are on there. So I did that on the carburetor bases. And then I'm coming back with this, just going to touch up some of the brass. And then we'll go back in with that same solvent that I use for the brass and get that nice and bright and shiny. So when the cover goes back on, the air cleaner assembly goes back on, you'll be able to see all the little detail through the side. The next part of the process is we're going to replace with the correct black oxide finished hardware. One other thing I wanted to point out, we're not going to get to all the hardware today because I only have so much with me, but we'll also at some point change out the hardware here for the radiator mounts and that sort of thing. But today we're going to focus on the cam cover and these distributors. These are available. These are a special size, special thickness for the distributors, and then these are just standard 6mm, but they're in the correct finish. now it's time to put the air cleaner assembly back on and then do a final wipe down, and then we'll double check everything. Then we'll compare our notes to what we started with and look at our scoring sheet and see where we are. Okay, we're pretty much finished up on the engine compartment. Time to move on to the outside of the car. I'm going to get started here on one thing that's unique about some of these 60s Ferraris are these headlight covers, which can be very delicate. Once they've been put on 2, 3, 4 times, they're really tough to take on and off. So I've actually gotten these started, cheated a little bit, simply because they could have been impossible to remove, but actually these come off pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is we'll unscrew these, then we're going to go in and probably pull the chrome bezel off, clean the whole area inside here. We'll polish it and then put finally a light ceramic coating in there so when we have issues again, it'll keep them cleaner longer basically. I'll then use a little bit of polish I have that's used for airplane canopies. The stuff works really well on this plexi and it'll look fantastic when it's done. So let's get started. I'm going to just take these off and then once we're done this, I'll probably pop off the turn signal as well. So there's only 2 screws and we can polish behind that in the same routine. Except we'll clean this. This is a plastic piece, so we'll clean it on the inside too. A lot of the cars that I maintain on a regular basis, something like this or a DB5 or DB6, where you have these covers or even an E-Type, people either over-tighten them or use the wrong hardware or something always happens. So we're actually pretty fortunate that these come off easily. But one thing I like to do, though, when we're working on these is make sure that when it goes back together, it can come apart again. So a lot of times I'm doing repair work in here, but the idea is to make it better than it was and not have them fall out or have 4 different kinds of screws. That's really popular too. I'm going to try to get this from the other side and pull this is just a chrome bezel that's attached here. So I'm going to grab a tool to pull that off and then we'll see what we can do from there. That will enable us to clean around the edge of the headlight as well. Now we've got them cleaned. I think we don't need too much polish. We're going to use just the 3rd step of the process and see if we can get it just a little bit clearer. There are some scratches in it, but nothing too horrendous. So I always try to err on the side of caution and use something that's more of a cleaner and hopefully a little bit of filling quality to it too. So in this particular case, I ended up taking the rubber gasket and the chrome molding off, and for good reason. There's already a big chip here, there's a slight crack on the other side, but more importantly, as you can see, they were filthy. So they created a big dirt line underneath this edge, and I wanted to make sure that we took care of that, got it cleaned up before we put it back together. Because all that will do is continue to abrade the plastic and who knows, just make it a mess. It also makes a really sharp edge once you clean it, and we put the molding back together. So right now what I'll do is I just cleaned the edge, and I did one coat of polish on the inside. Now I'll put a second coat of polish on the inside and then start on the outside. The advantage too is once this is completed, we'll have a finish on it that will be a lot more durable and also easier to clean in the future. One thing I can explain to you, but as I'm doing this, if you're wondering why I'm doing it in this method, in case you pick up a piece of dirt, it's much easier to polish out a piece of dirt or a little bit of dirt that's done in sort of a streak in a straight line. If you pick up a piece of dirt and you swirl it all over, you end up scratching in that kind of pattern, making it really hard to clean. But the other thing is, the reason I'm moving so slowly to do this is I'm listening. If you pick up a piece of dirt, it actually makes a noise. It makes a kind of a squeaky, scratchy sound, and you immediately can stop. Otherwise, if the room were full of noise, or if you're not aware of what that can happen, you'll end up getting, that dirt will scratch the hell out of the inside of this without even realizing it. So I'm listening. Just that little bit sounds really goofy, but it just saved me a ton of time in the long run, knowing that I didn't pick up any dirt. I was able to put the gasket back in. Took a little bit of time. And now we'll reset the screws where we had them before, and then we'll put this in place, give it a final polish, and we'll be good to go. So we move to the back end of the car. Before we start polishing back here, there is a ton of soot left here by these glorious exhaust tips and the 3 carburetors up front. So what we're going to do first is hit this with a light degreaser, and we'll let it foam itself off and then wipe it down, come back and hit it with a quick detailer, and then we'll start detailing each individual piece. While the taillight lenses are out, the badges are off, then we'll polish this entire back end and move on to the next thing, which will be to detail and put it back together. So let's get started. Okay, now we finished the 275 GTB, and for once, we went truly beyond the details. We showed you what it would take to take a car to a concours and how to prepare that car using different techniques. We cleaned the engine compartment, changed out some hardware, did some touch-up, some actual paint work, doing some of the interior work, all those fine details that people would miss, and then finally, cleaning the outside of the car, cleaning the headlight covers, the taillights, and making sure that everything is exactly the way it should be. So thanks again for joining us, and remember to like and subscribe.